In this lecture, we're going to be talking about hair lighteners and hydrogen peroxide. The hair lighteners technically are bleach. We don't like to use the B word because it can have a negative connotation for some people of the older area. So we use the word lighteners in place of bleach. The two forms of bleach are liquid and powder. The liquid bleach we don't use too much anymore, but it's oil bleach, which is a combination of sulfuric acid and hydrogen peroxide, and in some cases pigment. Sometimes it has a blue base, sometimes it has a yellow base. For instance, if you look at Clairol's 7th stage, their oil bleach is a very dark blue. If you look at Clairol's Born Blonde, their oil bleach is an amber yellowish base. And others have red bases, and we used to add these to our tints as a little boost to get it a little lighter. In the days before we had 40 volume or 30 volume hydrogen peroxide, that didn't exist, so we used oil bleach for that. Oil bleach can also be used as a, quote, pre-softener. And that is something that's applied to the gray hair area before a tint so that the gray hair will cover more easily. As we learned in the hair coloring segment, hair coloring formulations now always include the 3 primary colors when you're working with gray hair, and sometimes that's the N series, and the double N series has twice as much pigment. So we don't have that much difficulty covering gray hair anymore. But should you do have that client who's totally resistant, you can apply what is called a pre-softener. And you use the oil bleach, which is, like I said, sulfuric acid and hydrogen peroxide, and you put that on the new growth, and you let it set for about 20 minutes. And at that time, it is, quote, used the pre-softener word, but since it has a pH down here, because it's hydrogen peroxide, okay, it's more like it eats holes in the hair shaft. But as long as the pH isn't too low, that doesn't happen either. What is the determining factor that makes it so easy is it's negatively charged. Our cuticle is positively charged. Okay, when you look at the formula for tint, one of the main ingredients is ammonia, which, if you look at the formula, remember nitrogen is a +3 -3. Hydrogen is a +1, but there's 3 of them. So the negative ions from the nitrogen attach to the positive ions of the hydrogen, leaving behind 3 positive ions. So when I mix it with my hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O2, hydrogen peroxide has 2 negative ions, so it's anionic, it's negative. So tint and hydrogen peroxide mix very easily. Once it goes to the hair, because my pre-softener is negative, my tint is positive, it goes straight in. I don't meet the resistance, and it's an ionic resistance, it's magnetic. 2 negatives repel each other. 2 positives repel each other, but a negative and a positive adhere. So that's the main reason pre-softeners work. Not because it softens the hair, but because it creates a negative environment. Bleach, on the other hand, because oxygen gas is the active ingredient, is negatively charged. So you're mixing a negative hydrogen peroxide with a negative powder bleach, and it doesn't want to mix. You have to force it, and you have to keep beating it up until the pH of the bleach kicks in, as it were, and now I can get my bleach to be creamy. But if you've ever mixed bleach, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's extremely difficult to blend, and that's because they're both negative. Now, my powder bleach comes to me in 2 basic formulas. I happen to use, I don't know if you can see it, the L'Oreal Quick Blue. And the reason behind that is there's 2 ways ingredients on bleach are set up. So as I'm looking at the ingredients on the Quick Blue, The persulfate comes first, potassium persulfate, sodium silicate, sodium persulfate. Then there's a couple of alkalis in there, and then I have ammonium sulfate more toward the end. Then I have a magnesium peroxide and other carbonates. Now remember, in chemistry, anything ends that ATE means oxygen has been added to it. So the powdered bleach is a whole lot of oxygen. But because it also has magnesium peroxide and such, it's intended to be mixed with 20 volume or 6% hydrogen peroxide. It's not intended for you to go 30 and 40, because when I release too much oxygen gas, I make the hair brittle. Sometimes you do it. There are occasions, but that would come with a little bit more experience. The reason I use this is because ammonia is last. In some of the formulas, when you read ingredients, ammonium persulfate, ammonium perborate, they're in the first 3 or 4 ingredients. Now that doesn't make it right or wrong, but what it does make it is this factor right here. Remember that my oxygen gas converts cysteine to cysteine. Now remember that my body uses cysteine to make red, yellow pigment. So if my ammonia is at the beginning of the formula, I'm going to get red feedback. And it's going to be very difficult for me to get rid of it because I created it inside the hair shaft. This red feedback didn't come from going through the 7 stages of lightening, where your hair goes from, dark, lighter, lighter, lightest. It comes because I created it chemically with the ammonia that's in the bleach. So I created it. When I want red or golden highlights, that's the one to choose. But if my client wants cool blondes, this is the one. Because the ammonia is later in the formula, I don't get that red feedback that I have to fight. I'm allergic to hair color. The only thing I can do is bleach. And the last thing I want in here is red, orange roots, because I chose the wrong bleach. So it's not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of, did I choose the right product to get the result I want, so I don't have to go into my tint formulations and try to figure out how to cancel out all that red that I created and didn't need. So it's important that you understand the formulations here, okay? Now, on the other side of the street, we have our hydrogen peroxide. It comes in 4 basic forms. It is a liquid, a cream, which are kind of the same because it's creamy. However, liquid hydrogen peroxide is looking at water, where cream peroxide is whitish and creamyish, and it's very thick. It also has an extremely low pH. Cream peroxides are not made to work with powder bleach. Sometimes we do that in the salon because it might be all we have available, but it also is to help the formula from becoming too runny and releasing gases too fast, because as a student, you're much slower in your application. But in a salon, once you've got your speed up and you're comfortable with your applications, you should be using the liquid form because it has a little bit higher pH, and so it will lighten the hair more quickly. In a salon, your clients expect quickly. They don't expect it to take the 4 hours that it does when you're a student. The powdered form we call protonators, boosters, accelerators, and we added them to the original cream bleaches, which weren't the powder that we use today. They didn't have as much oxygen gas in them, but that's just to boost up, and booster is like what it says, an accelerator on your car, makes you go faster. And so sometimes you'll add the powdered form of hydrogen peroxide. The solid form is like a pill. Now, unfortunately, there are products out there in the hair coloring world that are very misleading. The main one is called Waterworks. You can see it at Sally's. Waterworks on the front says, do not add hydrogen peroxide. And as soon as somebody who is not educated in color sees that, they assume that there's no hydrogen peroxide in that formula. Okay? It says just add water. Now, to that water, they have you add a packet of powder. And guess what that powder is? Powdered hydrogen peroxide. Or it could be in a pill form. Yet, nobody turns it around to read the ingredients, and if they did, they would see powdered or solid hydrogen peroxide. So when your client comes in and you're looking at a new growth, and they go, oh, I don't have any hair, I don't have color in my hair, and you're looking at them and going like, excuse me? I see 3 lines of demarcation. I know darn well you have color in your hair, but I can't say that to her. I can't argue with her. She honestly believes that she didn't have color in her hair because she used a product similar to Waterworks, where she just mixed it with water and is totally oblivious. In my humble, I'm going to say opinion, okay, they should be turned into the FDA for misleading information, because it misleads a regular client to believe that they're not using a permanent hair color when in fact they are. Mostly we'll be talking about the creams and the liquids because that's what we use in our industry. And when we're talking about hydrogen peroxide, we're talking about the pH scale again. Okay, the pH of water is H2O. pH of water, the water has a pH of 7. As soon as I add another atom of oxygen and I create H2O2, I have pure hydrogen peroxide. The pH is still 7. It is extremely hard to find. Clairol is the only one that manufactures pure hydrogen peroxide and only at 40 volume. It is pure gold now. It is extremely hard to find. I have 6 bottles up here in my cabinet because I am so afraid that they're going to run out of it. And why is that important? Well, the pH of my hair is 5. The pH of my bleach is right about 10 because of the ammonia. Remember, ammonia is in there with other alkalis that have the pH of bleach right about 10. If I mix my bleach with a pH of 7, I stay on the alkaline side of the street, and alkalis soften the hair shaft and they make it expand. So the cuticle layer will begin to open up and allow the bleach to get into the hair shaft where it can work efficiently. The 40 volume is not used at 40 volume. I cut it to 20. I take 1 ounce of purified water, 1 ounce of 40 volume hydrogen peroxide, and I end up with 20 volume, or 6%. That's what I mix and put on my hair. So I get no red feedback, no hair color because of my allergies. Now, as soon as the hydrogen peroxide is stabilized, they have added phosphoric acid, which reduces the pH to about 4. And then in some instances, they add EDTA, which takes it down to a pH between 2.5 and possibly 3, but it's lower. Once again, you need the SDS so that you can see what the pH is of whatever hydrogen peroxide brand that you're choosing to use. Now, EDTA is also in this formulation. I just didn't mention it, but it's important. EDTA stands for some horribly long word like this, but the last A is acid. So if you really want to know what it is, just Google EDTA, and it's going to give you a name this long, a chemical word, and you're going, now I know why they just say EDTA. But EDTA is in all canned foods because EDTA is a preservative that preserves the texture of the vegetable so that when you open a can of green beans, they look like green beans and not spinach. It keeps them solid and it helps preserve the color. Now, when it's in my formula, do I need the texture of my hair preserved? Absolutely I do. Do I need the pigments preserved? Yes, beyond belief. The other benefit of EDTA is it protects the food from the metal can. That is extremely important when you're using hair coloring over relaxed hair because sodium hydroxide relaxer is a metallic salt and it's extremely difficult to get that residue out of the hair shaft. So when you're working over sodium hydroxide relaxed hair, never use a color or a bleach or hydrogen peroxide that does not have EDTA. If I'm lightening, I'm mixing it with hydrogen peroxide. EDTA needs to be in both of those. If I'm using tint, EDTA and hydrogen peroxide needs to be in both of those to protect my hair from the metals that could be left behind, and even sometimes shampooing. The water that comes through the purifying plant comes down your water pipes. It picks up iron and plastic. Who knows what it picks up? Copper, depending on the types, and those are metals. And that residue can be left in the hair shaft. So you want to make sure that you have the protection of EDTA. Preserve the texture of the hair, preserve the pigment in both the hair and the artificial pigment, and protect you from any metals that could possibly be on the hair shaft. But remember, it also reduces the pH. The lower the pH goes, the longer it's going to take this bleach to lighten my hair. The longer it will take my tint. If I'm using a high lift tint, if I'm using a tint that lifts as well as deposits, and I reduce the pH, remember the pH of tint was only 8.6, so if my hydrogen peroxide is down here at 4 or 2, I lower the pH. It does not have the ability to soften the hair shaft and expand the cuticle because I reduced the pH with my choice of hydrogen peroxide. Now, if I'm putting this over already bleached hair, let's say I've come in and I say, you know what, I want you to match this darker hair that's growing in. I want some low lights. This is what you want for that. You don't need to soften the hair. You don't need to open my cuticle. You need your tint or your color to have a pH of 3 or 4 because I only want to deposit my color. I don't need any lifting action. So when we're studying about hydrogen peroxide, we need to make sure we understand the pH and how that affects the ability of the product to do what you want it to do. Remember, there's nothing right or wrong. Okay, hairdressers never make mistakes. We only create new looks. So if you create a new look, hopefully it's one she's happy with, which doesn't always happen. But when we're working with hydrogen peroxide now, we're going to be talking about the oxygen gas that's available to activate my tint. Clairol says that even at the 1% will activate a demi, but normally it's going to be 1.5% of oxygen gas that's in your demi colors, just enough oxygen to activate the pigment molecule, remember aniline, and or paraphenyldiamine in my pigment, then the ammonia that's in there, which is extremely low in a demi color. It's there because otherwise you couldn't smell it. Okay, so you know it's there. The traditional formulation is 6%, and chemists only refer to the percentage of available oxygen gas. hairdressers use the word volume. So you need to be able to use those interchangeably in case the state board uses them interchangeably. So 6% is traditional formula for mixing traditional colors. Now, when I'm doing my pre-D test, whatever my formula says to use is what I need to use in my mix. So if I'm doing a demi, it's 3%. That's the hydrogen peroxide I need to use. It's also a disinfectant at 6%. Okay. When I dilute it and I go down, 3% is 10 volume. So we just cut this in half. There's no major, mathematical genius formula here. If I have 6% and I add 1 ounce of purified water to 1 ounce of 6%, I have 3%, which in turn is referred to as 10 volume. If I add another ounce of water, I cut it to 1.5%, that gives me 5 volume. I can't go up. Okay, so I only buy the 40 volume and reduce it as I need it. So 40 volume is 12%. If I cut this in half, I get 9.5 and 6 and so on. So once again, I need to know the percentage of oxygen gas. I need to know it with volume. I can't separate those two. State board could ask you any number of things. One of the major questions when using hydrogen peroxide, 3% hydrogen peroxide or 10 volume, and they're going to use the percentage for this, is a deposit-only color. 3% is also an antiseptic. Now this is an interesting factor. Don't ever buy Clairol's 10 volume hydrogen peroxide when you can go to Target and buy the antiseptic for 59 cents. Clairol sells a quart for $3.98. Target sells the exact same formula for 50 cents. Go figure. So if I don't dilute it, always buy your 3% hydrogen peroxide at Target or some other equally, like even the grocery store sells it at like less than $1. And it's also, that's supposed to be Neut, N-E-U-T, neutralizer for permanent waving. So a state board question could be, 3% hydrogen peroxide is used in all of these except. And this could be a disinfectant, it could be a high lift tint, it could be anything. But as estheticians, you're not going to think about deposit-only color neutralizer, but it's antiseptic. And it's a very good antiseptic. When we're doing nails in the salon, I would always put in my soap bath hydrogen peroxide because hydrogen peroxide foams at the site of an infection. So if my clients had anything wrong with their nails before I ever touched them, and they went, same thing with the pedicure tub. I don't use hot soapy water as the initial soaker. I use hydrogen peroxide, and I use it in the form of Clorox 2. Clorox 2, is for your laundry, and half a cap full of Clorox 2 into a foot bath. The active ingredient in Clorox 2 is hydrogen peroxide. That's why it's safe to use on all of your colored clothes. For tennis shoes, every time you try to whiten your tennis shoes, they turn yellow. Use bleach. Mix up your powder bleach, hydrogen peroxide, paint it on your shoes, and you'll brighten your tennis shoes and they won't turn yellow, provided you used the right formula of bleach. Okay, the one where the ammonia is at the end of the formula, not the beginning. I need to be sure of that. But then when my client puts her feet in the soap bath, foot bath, if she has athlete's foot or ringworm of the nail or any skin disease order, then it's going to foam and bubble at the site of that infection, and you're going to see all these bubbles. Now, Don't panic if you see a little bit of bubbles, because that's normal. You have bacteria on the surface of your skin, and so you're going to get some bubbles. It's when they come up like that fish tank. You know, your fish tank bubbles go all the way to the top. When you see the bubbles coming up rapidly, then you know they have some type of an issue that needs to be referred to a physician. So you say, you know what, you see all those bubbles down there? I can't work on you because you have some type of an infection. So I'm going to rinse, take a pitcher of clear water, hand her a towel, rinse it off, tell her dry her own feet, put her own towel in the dirty bin, okay? Dump your tub and disinfect it. Even if you used a tub liner, whatever you did, that tub has to be disinfected now because that client had an infectious or communicable type disease. And so that needs to be taken care of. But hydrogen peroxide as an antiseptic in pedicuring and manicuring is a really good way to protect yourself from picking up another's client. So an overview for this class is going to be the powdered bleach liquid, oil bleach for pre-softeners, powder bleach for almost everything else we do. The ammonia, remember, converts my cystine to cysteine, which gives me that red feedback, unless it's at the end of the formula. My hydrogen peroxide comes to me either pure, stabilized, and always it's phosphoric acid and or EDTA. It comes in a liquid cream, liquids for lighteners, creams for tinting. The powder form and the solid form are in companies like Waterworks, where they don't want you to know, use water only. So your clients need to be aware of that. Then I have my percentage of available oxygen gas, and I have my volume, and this is important for your state board.